Welcome to Lee Kiao Jung channel. If this is your first time here, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share to support me in creating more meaningful videos. Today, we follow the story of Sung Luyen, a single mother quietly enduring a life shaped by hardship and sacrifice. In the earliest hours of dawn, when mist still clings to the earth and the mountains remain hidden in shadow, she lifts the worn bamboo basket onto her back and begins her journey toward the guava orchard. The road ahead is empty and silent, broken only by the soft sound of her footsteps pressing into the damp ground. Each step carries more than exhaustion. It carries responsibility, determination, and the fragile hope of survival for both herself and her young daughter. Dew-soaked grass brushes against her legs as trees stand motionless, watching in silence as she passes by. She walks not for comfort nor for rest, but to harvest each guava with care, knowing that every fruit gathered means food on the table and another day her child can wake with a full stomach. The cold morning air bites gently at her skin, yet her posture remains steady and her eyes remain fixed forward. In her heart, Sung Luyen understands one simple truth. As long as she keeps moving, as long as she refuses to stop, her daughter's future still has a chance to grow. As Sung Luyen walks onward, the quiet of the road is suddenly broken by the distant sound of a motorbike approaching from the opposite direction. She hesitates for a brief moment, then raises her hand and gently signals for the woman to stop. When the motorbike comes to a halt, Sung Luyen politely asks if the woman has a phone she could borrow to make a call. Receiving the phone, her fingers tremble slightly as she reaches into her pocket and pulls out a small, worn piece of paper, carefully unfolding it to reveal a phone number she has kept for a long time. She dialed slowly, her breath held in silent anticipation, but the call does not connect. The automated silence on the other end confirms what she fears. The number is unreachable. A quiet disappointment settles in her chest. She hands the phone back with a soft thank you, then gathers the courage to ask whether the woman knows someone named James. The woman thinks for a moment before nodding, saying she does know a man by that name, and asks how Sung Luyen is related to him. Sung Luyen lowers her gaze and answers calmly that they are only friends. Hearing this, the woman continues, explaining that James frequently travels abroad for work and is often away for long periods of time, and that recently he has started a new relationship and now has a girlfriend. The words fall heavily into the silence of the morning. Sung Luyen feels her heart tighten, as if something sharp has pressed deeply into it, stealing her breath and warmth all at once. She remains still, absorbing the truth without protest or tears. After a brief pause, she lifts her head, thanks the woman sincerely for being honest, and wishes her a safe journey. As the motorbike starts again and disappears down the road, Sung Luyen stands alone, the weight on her back unchanged, but the weight in her heart now far heavier, forcing her to continue forward with a quiet strength that hides her pain beneath steady footsteps. As if guided by fate, Sung Luyen continues walking alone along the empty road, her figure small against the vast silence surrounding her. Every step now feels unbearably heavy after learning that James has chosen another woman, and the truth echoes in her mind with cruel clarity. The morning that once felt hopeful now seems distant and cold, pressing down on her heart with every breath she takes. After walking for a long time, her strength finally gives way, and she slowly sits down by the roadside, placing the basket beside her as if it too has become too heavy to carry. In that quiet moment, everything she had tried not to understand suddenly becomes clear. James's long absence was never accidental. The days he never came to see her, the months he never asked about her or her young daughter, Kyung, and the phone calls that were never answered were all part of a truth she was not ready to face. Realizing this feels like watching her world collapse once again, piece by piece, without mercy. She lowers her head and cries silently, allowing her tears to fall without sound, as if even her sorrow is afraid to disturb the stillness around her. There is no one to witness her pain, no one to offer comfort, only the endless road stretching forward, indifferent to her suffering. For a brief moment, she allows herself to feel the depth of her despair, the loneliness, and the weight of broken hopes. But fate does not allow her to remain there for long. Luyen knows that no matter how deeply she is hurt, stopping is not an option. Slowly, she wipes away her tears, takes a steady breath, lifts the basket back onto her tired shoulders, and stands up once more. Even when destiny is cruel, she must keep walking, because her child's future depends on her strength. Luyen continues walking until the sound of flowing water gently reaches her ears, and soon she arrives at a small stream hidden among the trees. She stops there, slowly lowering herself to sit by the water's edge, letting the basket rest beside her as the steady current moves past without concern. In the quiet rhythm of the stream, her thoughts drift back to everything James once did for her and her daughter. She remembers the days when his presence brought a sense of safety, when his words offered comfort in moments of fear and uncertainty. Back then, she truly believed that those small acts of kindness were the beginning of a brighter future for the two of them. She had allowed herself to imagine a life where her daughter could grow up without hunger or constant worry, where each morning would not begin with fear of survival, but with hope. James's promises once sounded sincere, spoken with warmth and conviction, and at night those promises became the fragile light that guided her through exhaustion and despair. They gave meaning to her struggles and strength to endure another difficult day. But now, sitting beside the stream, she realizes how completely those hopes have shattered. Every promise that once carried warmth now feels empty, reduced to nothing more than carefully spoken lies. The future she had built in her heart dissolves like mist under the rising sun, leaving behind only disappointment and silence. She stares into the moving water, watching it flow endlessly forward, and understands that time does not wait for broken hearts. Slowly, she reaches into her pocket and takes out the small piece of paper with James's phone number written on it, worn and faded from being unfolded so many times. That number once represented connection, reassurance, and belief. Now it represents nothing but pain. With a trembling hand, Luyen releases the paper into the stream. It touches the water briefly before being carried away by the current, drifting farther and farther until it disappears from sight. As she watches it go, something inside her finally lets go as well. In that moment, she knows she has no hope left for James, no reason to wait, no expectation of his return. The stream continues to flow, indifferent yet honest, teaching her a silent lesson about letting go of what no longer belongs to her path. She remains seated for a while longer, breathing slowly, allowing the ache in her chest to settle into something quieter and more resolute. When she finally rises, her heart is still heavy, but it is no longer trapped by false promises. Turning away from the stream, Sung Luyen prepares to move forward, carrying only what is real: her strength, her endurance, and her unwavering love for her child. She slowly lifts the ring into her palm, the one James once placed there with promises of protection, love, and a future where she and her young daughter would never feel alone. For a long time, that small circle of metal had been a symbol of hope, something she clung to during nights filled with fear and uncertainty. It represented the belief that someone would stand beside her, that her struggles were seen and shared. But now, all of that exists only in the past. James has chosen another woman, and the meaning of the ring has faded into nothing more than a reminder of broken vows. Wearing it no longer brings comfort, only pain. Standing beside the flowing stream, Sung Luyen feels her chest tighten as she realizes that holding on to this promise only keeps her trapped in suffering. With trembling fingers, she opens her hand and lets the ring fall into the water, watching as it sinks beneath the surface and disappears forever, taking the last trace of that promise with it. The pain is overwhelming, and for a brief moment she wishes she could follow it, escaping a world that has given her so much disappointment and sorrow. Yet in that darkness, a single thought pulls her back. Her daughter, Kyu Jung, still needs her. That small life depends entirely on her strength. Remembering this, Sung Luyen steadies her breath and chooses to keep living, not for herself, but for the child who still believes in her. The road stretching out before Sung Luyen was not merely a path of dirt and stone. It was a physical manifestation of the emptiness that had come to define her existence. The early morning air was cool, yet it offered no relief to the burning ache that resided deep within her chest, a hollow, vibrating pain that felt less like an emotion and more like a permanent injury. She walked with a heaviness that had nothing to do with gravity and everything to do with a spirit that had been systematically dismantled. Life, in its cruel and arbitrary nature, had stripped her of the essentials. Hope had been the first to wither, followed quickly by trust, that fragile glass ornament shattered by betrayal. Finally, warmth had evaporated, leaving her shivering in the metaphysical cold of abandonment. By all accounts, Sung Luyen should have stopped. It would have been easier to simply lie down in the dust, to close her eyes and let the silence swallow her whole. The abyss was tempting. It promised an end to the struggle. But she did not stop. She could not. She was tethered to this world by a single fragile thread, Kyu Jung, her daughter. The thought of the child was the only spark in the ash heap of her soul. It was a terrifying responsibility, motherhood, to be the sole barrier between a small, innocent life and the harsh, unforgiving jaws of the world. From the ruins of a life repeatedly shattered by broken promises and misfortunes, Sung Luyen forced herself to rise. It was a mechanical, grueling resurrection. Every morning, she gathered the jagged fragments of her strength, piecing them together just enough to stand, just enough to step toward a future she could no longer clearly see. The road beneath her tired feet was silent and unforgiving. It offered no comfort, no signposts, only the endless demand for movement. She walked with a quiet, steely resolve, her heart weighed down by a sorrow so ancient it felt woven into her DNA. Yet every step she took was an act of quiet defiance against despair. It was a choice to endure rather than surrender, a choice to suffer the road so her daughter might one day walk a smoother path. Grief followed her like a shadow, clinging to her heels, whispering in her ear, but she refused to let it overtake her. She breathed deeply, filling her lungs with the dusty air, and continued until the shapeless horizon resolved into the familiar dark silhouettes of the trees. Arriving at the orchard's edge, Sung Luyen paused. For a fleeting moment, she allowed the stillness of the grove to wash over her. It was a different kind of silence here, not the empty silence of the road, but a living, breathing stillness. The leaves swayed gently in the breeze, whispering secrets to one another in a language she could not speak but understood in her bones. The faint, sweet, musky scent of ripe fruit hung in the air, a perfume of the earth that signaled life. There was no comfort here. Nature is indifferent to human suffering, but there was purpose, and right now, purpose was the only fuel she had. She adjusted the bamboo basket on her hip, the wicker biting familiarly into her side, and stepped between the rows of trees. The canopy above filtered the sunlight into dappled patterns on the ground, but Sung Luyen had no time for poetry. She began the search. Her eyes, sharp and practiced, scanned the branches for guavas that had fully matured. Her hands moved with a tenderness that belied the callousness of her life. She lifted heavy branches, her rough fingers grazing the textured bark and smooth leaves. She examined the fruit, checking the shade of green, the slight give of the skin, the size. She selected only those ready for harvest. Each time she twisted a guava free, the snap of the stem was a small victory. She lowered the fruit into her basket with reverence. This simple, repetitive motion, reach, twist, lower, steadied her racing thoughts. It was a meditation of survival. Deeper into the orchard she moved, swallowed by the green shadows. With every fruit she picked, she whispered a silent affirmation to herself. This is for Qzong. Each guava was not merely produce, it was a unit of survival. It was a bowl of rice, it was a warm coat. It was another day gained in the war against hunger and fear. The basket grew heavier with every addition, the weight pulling at her shoulder, straining the muscles of her back. But Sung Luyen refused to slow down. She adjusted the strap, gritted her teeth, and moved to the next tree. She was driven by necessity, not hope. Hope was a luxury she could not afford. Necessity was the master she served. As she worked, memories attempted to breach the dam she had built in her mind. Memories of a life before the ruin, of voices that had lied, of hands that had hurt. They tried to surface, to weaken her knees and flood her eyes with useless tears, but she pushed them aside with a mental shove as physical as the way she moved the branches. She was unwilling to let the past sabotage the present. Not today, she told the ghosts. Today, I work. The sun climbed higher, burning away the morning mist and casting a warm, heavy light across the orchard. The humidity rose, wrapping around her like a wet blanket. Sweat beaded on her forehead, trickling down her neck, stinging her eyes. Her muscles began to ache, a dull throb in her lower back and a sharp burn in her arms from the constant reaching. She welcomed the pain. There was a strange mercy in physical exhaustion. The screaming of her muscles drowned out the screaming of her heart. Bodily fatigue was honest. It was simple. It was easier to endure than the complex, suffocating weight of emotional agony. She focused entirely on the rhythm of her labor, allowing the repetition to hypnotize her. The world narrowed down to the essentials, the rustling of leaves, the heavy thud of fruit settling into the basket, and the sound of her own steady, ragged breathing. Periodically, she stopped to rearrange the guavas, stacking them with the precision of a mason laying bricks. She ensured they wouldn't bruise or crush one another. Every detail matters, because every fruit holds value. There was no room for carelessness in a life lived on the edge. Selling these would bring the meager coins needed for medicine, for food, for life. Sung Luyen had learned through the brutal tutelage of hardship that survival demanded patience and precision. She could not afford to rest. The orchard witnessed her effort in silence. No one was there to see the sweat soaking through her shirt. No one was there to praise her endurance or marvel at her strength. She was alone. Yet she continued without a single word of complaint. With the bamboo basket now brimming with the harvest, Luyen hoisted the heavy load onto her back. The weight was immediate and crushing, a physical force that sought to bend her spine toward the earth. The woven straps dug into her shoulders, biting into the flesh with a familiarity that spoke of years of unyielding labor. Yet she did not falter. She adjusted her posture, leaning forward to counterbalance the burden, and began the trek toward the market. The road beneath her feet seemed longer than usual, every step a negotiation with gravity, but she marched on. This was the path she and her daughter had traveled countless times, a route etched into her memory, where every stone and turn held the echo of their shared footsteps. When she finally arrived at the bustling marketplace, the atmosphere shifted instantly. The silence of the orchard was replaced by a chaotic, vibrant wall of sound. She navigated through the throngs of people to her usual spot, a small, humble patch of ground where she and Q Jung had spent so many days selling vegetables and fruit. It was a space defined by memory. With a long, shuddering sigh that released the tension accumulated in her chest, she lowered the heavy basket to the ground. Her hands, though trembling slightly from the exertion, moved with practiced care and reverence. She began to unload the guavas, arranging them with the meticulousness of an artist displaying a masterpiece. Each fruit was still wrapped in a protective layer of clear nylon, the plastic glistening slightly in the dappled sunlight. This wrapping was not merely for protection against the dust, it was a testament to her care, a shield she placed around the only valuable things she possessed. She lined them up in neat, inviting rows, creating a sense of order amidst the market's sprawl. As she worked, a silent, desperate prayer formed in her mind, a hope that today would bring fortune, that the world would be kind enough to take this weight from her so she could feed her child. The market was a world of its own, a stark and dazzling contrast to the quiet solitude of the trees she had just left. All around her, the air vibrated with the raw energy of commerce and community. Other stalls were already teeming with activity, the sounds of bargaining, the clatter of goods, the shrill cries of vendors, and the low hum of conversation created a symphony of life. But it was the laughter, the bright, unburdened sound of people greeting one another that struck her the most. In the wake of the crushing shock she had recently endured, one might expect the joy of others to feel like an insult, but for Luyen, it was a lifeline. The lively atmosphere acted as a balm to her wounded spirit. The collective happiness of the crowd, the mundane normalcy of people buying dinner and sharing gossip seeped into her. It pushed back the cold numbness that had frozen her heart. It was a reminder that life continued, that the sun still shone, and that she was still part of this living, breathing world. Her patience was soon rewarded. As the morning wore on, customers began to stop at her modest display. They were drawn, perhaps, by the freshness of the fruit or the quiet, stoic dignity of the woman selling it. Hands reached out, inspecting the nylon-wrapped guavas, checking for firmness and quality. Voices inquired about the price, and the ancient dance of commerce began. One by one, the fruits were weighed on her handheld scale. Some customers bought a single kilo, others bought 2 or 3, their coins and notes exchanging hands and finding their way into Luyen's pocket. With every sale, the basket grew lighter, and the knot of anxiety in her stomach loosened just a fraction. The rhythm of trade took over, and time seemed to blur. She existed only in the exchange, the giving of fruit, the receiving of sustenance. Finally, as the crowd began to thin, she looked down to find the basket empty, save for a single guava. She stared at the last fruit for a moment. It was the lone survivor of the harvest, perfect and ripe. She decided to keep it. It would not be sold.
This single fruit would be her meal, a small, solitary reward to sustain her own failing strength. With the day's work done, she began to pack up her belongings. The sun was shifting in the sky, casting long, stretching shadows across the market floor. She gathered her empty basket and the few tools she carried, preparing for the final leg of her journey. She turned her steps toward home, not a house of brick and stone, but a fragile thatched hut that stood as her only shelter against the elements. It was a meager sanctuary, a place of poverty, but it was hers. As she walked back with the weight of the basket gone and the day's earnings pressed safe against her side, she felt a profound sense of survival. She was returning to her hiding place, to the leaves and the quiet, having fought the day and won.
The long road back from the market slowly drained what little strength remained in Sung Luyen's body. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if the weight of the day pressed down on her shoulders and into her bones. By the time her small shelter appeared in the distance, the sun had already begun its descent behind the mountains. The hut stood quietly at the edge of the forest, fragile and uneven, built from dried leaves and thin bamboo poles. It was poor and temporary, yet it was the only place that still waited for her without questions or blame. As she reached the clearing, she gently lowered the bamboo basket from her back. The dull sound it made when touching the ground marked the end of another long day. She stood there for a moment, breathing deeply, allowing the ache in her legs to settle. The air was changing. Evening was approaching fast, and with it came the cold she had learned to fear. Without delay, Sung Luyen moved toward the clothesline stretched between two rough wooden posts. The clothes she had washed earlier were dry now, stiffened by wind and dust. She gathered them carefully, folding each piece with quiet precision. She knew that once night fell, moisture would return, and damp clothes meant sickness. There was no room for carelessness in a life like hers. A sudden gust of wind passed through the clearing, making the leaves rustle above her. She tightened her grip on the clothes and glanced toward the sky. Dark clouds were drifting slowly, warning her that the night would be colder than usual. She needed to prepare. Near the side of the hut lay a small bundle of dry bamboo she had collected days before. Sung Luyen crouched beside it, her knees protesting as she reached for her knife. The blade was old and dull, but it was all she had. She began splitting the bamboo into smaller pieces. Each cut echoed sharply in the quiet air, the sound steady and rhythmic. Crack, snap. The work demanded focus, and in that focus, her thoughts briefly found rest. Survival had taught her that keeping the hands busy often kept the heart from breaking. When the bamboo was ready, she arranged it inside the small hearth blackened by countless fires before. Striking a match, she watched the flame catch and grow. Soon, warm orange light filled the hut, chasing away the shadows that clung to the walls. Sung Luyen extended her hands toward the fire, letting the warmth slowly return to her fingers. Fire was not comfort, it was protection. Without it, the night would be unbearable. She washed her hands and feet in a small basin, the cold water biting at her skin. The simple act grounded her, washing away the dust of the road and the weight of the market. From her basket, she took out a single guava she had saved for herself. She rinsed it carefully, watching the water slide over its green surface. This was her meal for the night, nothing more. Sitting close to the fire, she took a slow bite. The fruit was crisp and unexpectedly sweet. She chewed slowly, savoring the taste as if it were a rare gift. Outside, insects began their nightly song, filling the air with soft, steady sound. Inside the hut, the fire crackled gently. For a brief moment, the world felt distant, almost peaceful. But peace never lasted long. As the flames flickered, her thoughts returned to James. The truth she had learned earlier rose again in her chest, heavy and sharp. He had another woman.
The realization settled painfully, pressing against her heart until breathing felt difficult. She remembered the promises he once made, the future he painted with words that had given her hope. Now those words felt hollow, like echoes from a life that was never real. She wondered where he was at this moment, whether he ever thought of her or the child he had left behind. The answer hurt more than hunger ever could. Tears welled in her eyes, but she did not let them fall freely. Crying was a luxury she could not afford. She finished the guava, forcing herself to swallow every bite. Her body needed strength, even if her spirit resisted. When the fruit was gone, she wiped her hands and stared into the fire, watching the flames slowly weaken. The night deepened, and the fire began to fade, bright orange turning into soft red embers. Cold crept back into the hut, silent and persistent. Sung Luyen stood and prepared for sleep. There was no bed waiting for her, no blanket to shield her from the cold. From her basket, she pulled out an old sack once used to carry produce. Rough and worn, it smelled of earth and leaves, but it was thick enough to offer some protection. She spread it over her legs and lay down on the thin mat, curling her body inward to preserve warmth. Above her, the roof rustled as the wind moved through the dried leaves. The world outside felt vast and uncaring. Inside the hut, everything was small and fragile. Her warmth, her strength, her breath, yet she remained. As the last embers faded into darkness, Sung Luyen stared into the shadows. Tomorrow would come as it always did. Another road, another basket, another struggle awaited her. Life had not softened, and hope felt distant, but she had endured another day, and as long as she could rise and walk forward, she would continue. Not for promises, not for forgiveness, but for her daughter, who needed her to survive. For that reason alone, Sung Luyen would face the next dawn. If you have been moved by Sung Luyen's story, by her quiet dignity and her resilience in the face of overwhelming sorrow, and if you wish to see more of her journey as she fights for a better tomorrow for herself and her daughter, please consider supporting the channel. Don't forget to like this video, share her story with others who might need inspiration, and hit that subscribe button. Your support helps us bring these stories to light, reminding us all that even in the darkest nights, the human spirit can still find a way to endure.